Welcome to Dump Truck Toolbox. I'm Alan, and today is a special Veterans Day hauling tale. And hauling means not carrying dirt or stone in a dump truck. It's hauling in a nautical sense, because this hauling tale is called the Bosun of the Pagan River. Today I'm working on and around the Pagan River in Smithfield, Virginia. And Smithfield is known for its production of ham and pork products. One of the predecessor companies to Smithfield Foods was named Gwaltney. And my father attended high school at Smithfield High, and in his senior year, Mr. Gwaltney came to, I believe, the 4-H club, and made an offer of a piglet to each and every one of the senior boys. But the offer that Mr. Gwaltney made was, if you take a piglet from me and raise him over the course of the school year, I will buy the, what do we call a yearling hog, back from you at market rates. My dad took this piglet, and started raising it. At the same time, my dad was dating the girl who became his wife and my mother. My dad lived on or near the Pagan River, and my mom did not live really close. I'm not sure where she lived, Suffolk or somewhere like that. During the courting process, my dad would go to see my mom by water. And so he had access to a heavy wooden rowboat, and he put it out on the Pagan River, and early on learned to pay attention to the tides and the wind, because that rowboat was slow and hard to get moving forward under any conditions. If you were fighting the wind or the tide, it was even more difficult. And so the ideal trip would consist of catching the tide from Smithfield to my mom's home, and then visiting for however many hours, and then wait for the tide to turn and catch the tide back. And usually one way, the wind would be in your favor, and so my dad had a homemade burlap sail that he would hoist his oar and somehow secure the sail, haul lines in, to get it all set, and then it was easy sailing. Just had to steer the boat and let the wind and the tide do the work. At this point of the story, I want to mention that the piglet came in the fall of 1941. My dad's family, my grandfather was a farm laborer, and my dad and his brothers were sort of part of the deal, and so he did a lot of farm work as well. In December of 1941, my dad was in a dairy barn doing his milking chores. One of his friends was there. They were chatting and listening to the AM radio, and the news of the attack on Pearl Harbor came across the airwaves. Well, life went on. My dad continued to use the Pagan River to go visit his intended. He continued to do the chores. He continued his studies, and in the spring of 1942, he and his class graduated from Smithfield High School. Soon after that, my dad went to the recruiting station and joined the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve. Immediately went into boot camp, and I think he had one stateside assignment, but pretty quickly he was assigned to an ammo ship serving in the Pacific. I think it was the USS Marsden. And they typically operated solo, because any escorts that you might assign to an ammo ship would be destroyed if the ammo ship was hit. The Coast Guard has an informal motto: you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. The Coast Guard crew of the USS Serpens demonstrated that motto by giving the last full measure of service to their country on January 29th, 1945, when the ammo ship was destroyed, killing 196 Coast Guard crewmen. So it was a very, very dangerous assignment. Then his general quarters station, his battle station, was to serve on an anti-aircraft gun. To prepare for the defense of the ship, he and his fellow gun crew members would practice shooting skeet with a shotgun off the back of the ship, off the fantail of the ship, so that if and when they were attacked by a Japanese aircraft, they would have the skills necessary to shoot it down. This was not theoretical. My dad was serving with the gun crew when it shot down a Japanese kamikaze plane. He was not actually aiming or firing the gun. He was serving as a loader, but he and his fellow Coast Guardsmen on that gun crew received a citation for shooting down the kamikaze, because if the kamikaze had hit, the ship would have been destroyed. Everybody on it would have disappeared, would have been killed, and this video would not be made today. My dad had another reward or commendation for this incident. Everybody on that gun crew never had to pay for beer when they were in port. Someone else on the ship would always cover their tab. That's funny, because my dad was a teetotaler, did not drink any form of alcohol, including beer, and he was much more likely to be on shore patrol duty and arresting, or at least coercing, his shipmates back to the ship to sober up after a night on the town. My dad served in the Pacific for some time. He's involved in a number of invasions. He's involved in resupplying ships in the Philippines. And as the war was winding down, he was assigned to a former lifeboat station on the New Jersey beach front. And his job there was to guard the coast, literally, as a Coast Guardsman, against any saboteurs or other enemies of the United States. To guard the beach, my dad had to patrol 6 or 7 miles by himself, one way down the beach, and then turn around and head back the other way. In the spirit of the lifeboat service, you had to go out, but you didn't have to come back. To guard the coast, my father was equipped with 2 items, an M1 rifle and a flare gun. If he spotted any saboteurs or other people who should not be entering the U.S. by water on the New Jersey beachfront, he was instructed very specifically do not use your M1 rifle first. Use the flare gun. Because if you use the flare gun, we will send out other people from your duty station, armed to the teeth, to come investigate. If you use your M1 rifle and you are not successful, that is, you get killed or severely wounded, no one will know. And so there was no radio for him to carry. The flare gun was his only means of communication. And he was trained to sacrifice himself to guard that beach by using the flare gun first. During that time, when he was serving as a Coast Guardsman, my mom found a job in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and they got married soon after the victory over the Japanese. Because once he had been discharged honorably from the Coast Guard, he said, "That's it, I'm done, I've served my country, I fought a war, no more military glory for this boy." My mom and dad returned to this area. He obtained an apprenticeship at the Langley Research Center, which was part of NACA at the time. It was later renamed to NASA. Well, by 1947 or 48, money was really tight, and so he decided to join the Navy Reserve. He was assigned to a unit in Norfolk, and the unit was designed and trained to take over a mothballed carrier in the remote chance that the U.S. would find itself in another war. And that remote chance happened, of course, with the Korean War. The sailors in my dad's unit all expected to be called up together and probably assigned, a couple of regular Navy officers to command the ship and key departments. But otherwise, it'd be a mothballed ship. A crew of reservists would bring it out of mothballs, do some additional training, and then head to Korea. Well, that turned out to be about 90% right for my dad, in that the unit itself was not called up, but my dad and one other friend were called up to staff 2 billets, 2 empty slots in a New Orleans-based U.S. Navy Reserve unit. And that New Orleans unit had been called to active duty to go to San Diego and pull the USS Princeton out of mothballs and get it ready to go fight in the Korean War. Well, if you're going to go fight a war, it's nice to do it with people that you know, that you're friends with, that you've trained with. But my dad and his one friend from Norfolk found that it was a very difficult social setting, surrounded by strangers. After the ship was fully prepared, they headed off the coast of Korea. My dad would tell stories of how, as an aircraft sheet metal rating, the needs for sorties, the needs for planes to fly combat missions, required that the repairs be done on the flight deck. So a plane would land, it had some type of combat damage from flak or air-to-air combat or whatever, and the mechanics, including the sheet metal mechanics, would perform repairs on the flight deck as the plane was getting ready to go back out with after refueling and rearming. And my dad told of how a number of times a plane would land, the pilot would be wounded, the medics would help carry the pilot out of the cockpit, and someone would be hosing down the blood in the cockpit while the mechanics were repairing the plane, including the sheet metal, and then other people would refuel and rearm it. Another fresh pilot would climb into that cockpit and go fly off and do another combat mission. very difficult, very stressful circumstances. My dad, through no grand career plan, managed to have sea duty in 2 different wars in 2 of the most deadly places a sailor or Coast Guardsman can find himself. Came back to the States. My dad said, once again, that's it. I've served my country in 2 wars, and I'm done. I'm totally, finally done. So he finished the apprentice school, started working on the cutting edge jet technology that NASA took the lead on developing. He worked on a number of projects that you may have heard of, the X-15. He worked on the Mercury space program. Didn't do Gemini for some reason, I never figured that out, but he worked on Apollo. He worked on the Viking lander. The Viking lander was the first unmanned spacecraft to land on Mars. But sometime in those intervening years, he and my mom had decided once again they were short on money, and so he rejoined the reserves, but this time he chose the Coast Guard again. My father retired from the Coast Guard Reserve at the age of 60. He had 13 years of credited service. He was a petty officer 2nd class aircraft sheet metal mechanic in the U.S. Navy Reserve. In the Coast Guard, he attained the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4. His specialty was he was a bosun, not a bosun's mate. He was the bosun of the Pagan River. Grace Wiggins Slade, his war bride, Harry Baxter Slade, truly the greatest generation. If you've served in any branch of the military, hot war, cold war, peacetime, thank you for your service. Big thanks to the members of the Coast Guard. You have to go out, but you don't have to come back. Happy Veterans Day.